All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a deep dive into the dark side of 19th century Cornwall.
Ooh, sounds intriguing.
It is, it really is. We're talking smuggling, we're talking wrecking, basically the stuff that makes for a great historical thriller.
Yeah, the kind of history you don't necessarily learn in school.
Exactly. And our guide for this deep dive, Daphne du Maurier's Jamaica Inn. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Isn't that just a novel?
A work of fiction.
Right. But trust me, the first 15 chapters, which is where we're focusing today, they're packed with historical detail.
It's like she took a snapshot of this hidden world and said, here, take a look, but be careful what you wish for.
That's a great way to put it. So let's paint a picture for our listeners. Imagine the windswept moors of Cornwall, bleak, desolate, isolated.
Definitely not a tourist destination.
No, not unless you're into, like, gothic mystery vibes. And smack dab in the middle of this landscape is Jamaica Inn.
And as Du Maurier describes it, this inn is not exactly a cozy bed and breakfast.
Not even close. Dilapidated, rundown, practically radiating an air of, well, lawlessness.
It's like the Moors themselves are breeding something dark and dangerous.
And stepping right into this scene is our protagonist, Mary Yellen. She arrives at Jamaica Inn expecting a family situation, living with your aunt and uncle.
A fresh start, maybe.
Right, exactly. But what she gets is a crash course in just how bad family situations can get.
You said it. Empty inn. An aunt who's clearly terrified of her own husband. Mary starts picking up on these bad vibes immediately.
Like she's walked into a spiderweb without even realizing it.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, smuggling in 19th century Cornwall wasn't some small-time operation. We're talking organized crime.
Oh, yeah. Fueled by poverty, high taxes on goods coming in legally. It was a whole underground economy, practically.
And Jamaica Inn really throws open the doors to that world.
It does. So Mary stumbles onto this, Saturday night gathering at the inn, and let's just say it's not your typical pub night.
Smugglers, shady characters, the whole lot.
Right. And then it escalates. Mary sees wagons arriving in the dead of night, unloading who knows what, everyone whispering, sneaking around.
Du Maurier really nails that sense of secrecy, of something illicit going on.
It's like a scene out of a thriller, almost.
And this is when Mary starts to realize this isn't just an inn, this is the heart of the smuggling operation.
And everyone around her is complicit.
Including her own family.
Which leads to this incredibly tense moment where Aunt Patience finally breaks down and confesses to Mary. Jamaica Inn is a hotbed of illegal activity, and she's terrified.
She even implies that someone might have been murdered.
Which is just, oh man, talk about adding fuel to the fire.
It really sets the stage for the mystery that unfolds.
Right. And speaking of shady characters, let's talk about Joss Merlin, the landlord, and Mary's uncle. This guy is a walking red flag.
Intimidating, involved in the smuggling, definitely has a drinking problem.
Like textbook bad guy material.
It's tempting to write him off as just that, but Du Maurier does give us glimpses of something more complex.
Yeah, there are hints of regret, almost like he's battling with his conscience.
Which makes him a much more interesting character than just evil uncle.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And then there's Jem, Joss's younger brother, who kind of saunters into the story, all charming and roguish.
He's a horse thief, though. Not exactly a glowing recommendation.
Not really, but there's this undeniable spark between him and Mary.
Oh, yeah, that classic attraction to danger.
It's like she's drawn to the danger, even as she's trying to run from it.
And Du Maurier keeps us guessing about Jem. Is he another bad guy, like his brother, or is there something more to him?
That's what makes this early part of the novel so compelling.
We're never quite sure who to trust.
And just when you think things can't get any more complicated, Mr. Bassat, the local magistrate, shows up.
The law arrives at Jamaica Inn.
Right. And he's like a bloodhound, convinced Joss is up to no good.
But even H.E. can't quite get a handle on what's happening at Jamaica Inn.
It's like the smuggling is so deeply rooted, so ingrained in the community, that it's almost impossible to unravel.
Which makes you realize just how powerful these forces were, how difficult it was to fight against them.
And very. Poor Mary is stuck right in the middle of it all.
Caught between a rock and a hard place, as they say.
But she's not just a helpless damsel, She's smart, she's observant. She starts putting together her own theories about what's really going on.
She's not just reacting, she's actively trying to understand, to make sense of this crazy world she's found herself in.
And that's what makes her such a compelling character, I think. She's not passive, she's fighting back in her own way.
Yeah, she's definitely not just a pawn in this game.
And that brings us to the end of part 1 of our deep dive. But buckle up, because things are about to get even more intense in Jamaica Inn.
Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.
So we've got smuggling, we've got this dark, oppressive atmosphere, but Jamaica Inn doesn't stop there. It takes a turn for the even darker when Joss drops this horrifying confession on Mary.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really chilling.
He's involved in wrecking.
Which, for our listeners who might not know, is not just some maritime accident. This was deliberate.
Deliberate and brutal.
Luring ships onto the rocks during storms so they could plunder the wreckage.
It's hard to even imagine the cruelty, the coldness of it.
It really makes you think about the desperation, the poverty that must have existed for people to resort to such things.
And the isolation, too. Like, the Moors themselves were breeding this darkness.
It's almost like Du Maurier is suggesting that the landscape itself shapes the people who inhabit it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So Mary's caught in the middle of all this, but she's not just a helpless bystander.
Oh no, she's far from helpless.
She's smart, she's observant, and she starts piecing together her own theories about what's really happening at Jamaica Inn.
She's trying to understand, to make sense of this chaotic world she's been thrust into.
And that's when her suspicions about Jem start to grow.
Especially after she sees those wagons arriving shortly after he visits.
Like, red flag, red flag!
Right. But at the same time, she's drawn to him, which just makes her doubt her own judgment even more.
Talk about a complicated situation.
It is. And Du Maurier does a brilliant job of layering these doubts and suspicions, both in Mary's mind and Dee in the reader's mind.
We're constantly questioning who to trust, what's real, what's not.
It keeps you on the edge of your seat, that's for sure.
Then there's this whole Christmas Eve adventure where Mary ends up going to Launceston with Jem.
And he pulls off this incredibly audacious move.
Yeah.
Selling a stolen horse back to the magistrate's wife.
It's almost comical, the sheer audacity of it.
Have to admire his nerve.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And Mary, she's in awe of him, even as she's realizing how dangerous he can be.
It's that push and pull, that attraction to the danger that keeps their relationship so interesting.
But then things take a dark turn. Jem vanishes in Launceston, leaving Mary stranded and terrified.
Another classic Du Maurier move. Just when you think you're starting to understand things, she throws a curveball.
It's like she's constantly reminding us that nothing is certain, no one can be trusted.
Exactly. And this disappearance really reinforces that central theme of uncertainty that runs throughout the novel.
So Mary's desperate, she needs help, and she turns to the only person who's shown her any kindness. Francis Davy, the vicar of Alternan.
The local clergyman, a figure of authority and trust.
Exactly. But even here, Du Maurier sows seeds of doubt. There's something about Davy, a stillness, an aloofness, that makes you wonder if he's hiding something.
Like there's more beneath that calm exterior.
Right. And unfortunately for Mary, the vicar's away when she needs him most, so she ends up seeking help from the magistrate's wife, thinking she's doing the right thing.
Which turns out to be a huge mistake.
Because Mrs. Besant drops a bombshell. Her husband is already on his way to Jamaica Inn to arrest Joss.
Talk about a gut punch.
I know, right? Mary realizes she's inadvertently set a trap for her uncle.
And she races back to Jamaica Inn, trying to warn him, but it's too late.
They find Joss murdered.
And the atmosphere of the inn is just thick with dread, with this heavy silence.
Like the walls themselves are holding their breath.
And as if one dead body wasn't enough, they discover Aunt Patience as well.
It's a bloodbath, plain and simple.
And the mystery deepens. Who killed Joss? Was it the peddler they suspected earlier? Or is there someone else pulling the strings?
It's like all the secrets, all the darkness of Jamaica Inn are finally coming to the surface. Okay, so we left off with a double murder at Jamaica Inn. Things are about as bad as they can get, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But Du Maurier has a few more twists and turns up her sleeve.
It's almost hard to believe things could get even more intense, but they do. We've got Davy, with Mary as his captive, heading towards this hidden cove where his ship is waiting.
And this journey across the moor is just brutal. It's like a physical manifestation of Mary's inner turmoil.
The wind, the rain, the darkness, it's all so oppressive.
And Davy's right there with her, trying to break her spirit, convince her that resistance is pointless.
He uses this combination of threats and, like, twisted kindness, you know? Like, he genuinely believes he's doing her a favor by forcing her into this life of crime.
Classic manipulation tactic. Isolate the victim and then try to reshape them to fit your own needs.
But Mary's tougher than he realizes. She's not backing down. She challenges him at every turn, reminding him that he's a murderer, a hypocrite hiding behind his religious robes.
There's a real fire in her, a refusal to be a victim.
But Davy's fixated on her, almost obsessed. It's like he sees something in Mary that he wants to control, to possess.
It adds this whole other layer of creepiness to the story.
Right, and as they get closer to that cove, the tension just keeps ratcheting up. You're like, this is it, Mary's doomed. But then
Slim appears.
out of nowhere, and not as the villain we've come to expect, but as Mary's rescuer.
It's such a shock, you almost don't believe it at first.
And the fight between Jem and Davy, brutal.
Like all the darkness of Jamaica Inn is erupting in this one final showdown.
And the setting, the storm-ravaged moors, it's almost like another character in the fight.
It's this wild, untamed force that mirrors the chaos of what's happening.
Jem defeats Davy, but not without a cost. There's so much regret, so much unspoken emotion between them in that final encounter.
A sense of tragedy, but also maybe a glimmer of redemption for Jem.
And Mary, even though she's free, she's been through the ringer, Du Maurier doesn't shy away from the trauma she's endured.
Because she's a survivor, but she's also carrying the weight of everything she's seen and experienced.
And it brings us back to that question we posed earlier. Can Mary truly escape the shadow of Jamaica Inn?
It's a question Du Maurier leaves us to ponder.
And that's what makes Jamaica Inn so powerful, so thought-provoking. It doesn't offer easy answers. It doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow.
It leaves you with lingering questions, with a sense of unease that stays with you long after you've finished the book.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, what are we left with? What do we learn from Mary's journey through the darkness of Jamaica Inn?
I think it's a story that reminds us that good and evil aren't always so clear-cut, that even in the darkest of places there can be moments of hope, of redemption.
It's a story about the resilience of the human spirit, about the power of hope in the face of unimaginable adversity.
And it challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question everything we think we know about human nature, about good and evil, about the very nature of survival.
And maybe, just maybe, it encourages us to look for those flickers of hope in our own lives, to believe that even when things seem darkest, there's always a chance for change.
So there you have it, our deep dive into Jamaica Inn, a story of smuggling, of wrecking, of murder, and yes, even glimmers of hope.
We hope you've enjoyed this journey with us, and remember, there's always more to uncover, more to explore. So keep reading, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the stories that matter.